Welcome. Today I will talk you through my game against the Dutch Grandmaster Karel van der Weide. And the game was played during a team match between Münster and my home club Niederkassel. So I played for Niederkassel and I played with the black pieces. My opponent opened with e4 and I went for my favorite opening, the Philidor defense, and in particular, after he takes d, knight f6 and bishop e7, we reach the Antoshin Philidor, which is the line which I usually play. So White has a lot of options in this position. My opponent went for the move g3, which is still kind of fashionable nowadays. And Black has a couple of replies. For instance, you can go for d5 with some sharper lines. But since I was a bit afraid of preparation, I guess I went for the move castles here. So my opponent played bishop g2, and after knight c6, he decided to take off on c6. So another line that White could play is, for instance, castles, and I played this a couple of times as well. So for instance, after takes, I can go bishop e6, and while maybe White is slightly better, I think the position is perfectly playable for Black as well. So instead of doing that, he went for the line after knight takes c6. So I now have to double my pawns, and he played just short castles. So in this position, I was not entirely sure what to do. I went for a plan which I had played quite often in Blitz, which is the move bishop g4. I'm not sure if this is really the best plan, so I think I should look for improvements here. So for instance, rook e8 or knight d7 or bishop b7 all look a bit better than bishop g4. After bishop g4, the main issue is that he can just go f3. And after bishop e6, now my bishop on e6 is kind of misplaced. So in particular, in the way he played it, with a very strong setup with b3, now the problem is that this bishop, the c4 square is taken, and you really don't have anywhere to go. So maybe in that position I should have gone queen c8. So then at least I would force him to think about, does he really want to go g4 here, which at least opens his position a little bit. And maybe after h6, it's also not so clear what he has really reached with g4, or if he wants to permit me to go bishop h3. But I think in any case, even after queen c8, the position is slightly better for White. So instead of doing that, I went for rook e8, which is also fine, and he played bishop b2. And now I played queen c8, and he decided that he wants to go g4. And I didn't really want to go h6. I think h6 is the somewhat more reasonable alternative here, but I already wanted to go all out for a big fight, and I played the move d5, which now forces the matters. And well, so he went e5, which is logical. The only issue, of course, that this now blocks this bishop on b2. But on the other hand, he wants to go f4, f5, and that's pretty unpleasant for me. So I decided to give a check and to go knight d7. He could also go f4 here. The computer likes it even a bit better, but I think in any case, White's position is quite good. So he went knight a4 first, bishop f8, and now f4. So he's threatening f5 and winning a piece. So I have to go f5 myself. And now he has a very strong follow-up to that, which is just to take on f6. And after knight f6, to go f5. And now you can again see this very bad position of my bishop on e6, which would be much nicer somewhere else, let's say on e4. But there's nothing I can do. I retreated the bishop to f7. And now he went wrong a little bit. So now he played the move queen to d4. And I think this is maybe the first turning point. So I think he should have gone for g5. So the most natural move maybe is bishop h5. But then you can just go bishop f3. I can't take on f5 because then the piece is hanging. So I would have to take on f3, takes, knight e4, and now he has a strong move f6, directly attacking my king. And yeah, I can't go for knight d2 because of f7 check, and so the position is just very bad. So therefore, after g5, this bishop h5 maneuver doesn't really work, and I would have to settle for something like knight e4, queen g4, and now this is quite dangerous. So I can go something like g6 or rook b8, but in any case, the position is quite dangerous for me. So yeah, as I said, instead he went for queen to d4. And yeah, this allowed me now some counterplay. I went for the move knight to e4, preparing potentially bishop c5 at some point. But note that at this point still the white's battery here attacks this point on g7, so I can't move the bishop as of now. And yeah, so he went for rook a e1, which allowed me now to play the move I had planned, namely the move queen to d8. And here I was pretty happy, so I had the feeling that after the opening he was somewhat better, and now I had the feeling that I equalized at least, and I really get a very interesting game. I have the idea of going queen h4, bishop d6 at some point, and then maybe even attacking his king. So one move that one could think about here is taking on e4, but it doesn't really look, that great. I can just go d takes e, and now I have two bishops. Yes, my pawn structure is somewhat compromised, but I have the feeling that I have enough counterplay for that. So, but I guess objectively that's what white should do. So, with still very unclear and unbalanced play. Instead of doing that, my opponent played one of the most amazing moves which I have encountered in my career. So really kudos to him. Namely the move knight to c3. So when I came back to the board, I briefly looked at the board and I thought, what, knight c3? This cannot work. But maybe you can try to figure out what the idea is. Okay, so now maybe you have paused the video and you figured out the idea. That's exactly now what I had to do. And so I thought first, okay, what if I just go bishop c5, right? So after bishop c5, queen d3, knight f2, and I win an exchange. So did you see this idea? Well, I saw it, I calculated it for a long time, and then I decided to go for it because this was just a little bit too ingenious to be true. So I played bishop c5, and now he hit me with this amazing idea of knight c3, the move queen takes g7. Wow. This is really amazing creativity by my opponent to go for this line from a position which was more or less balanced, so there was absolutely no need for him to do that. Yes, just extremely inventive play. I took, and now he took on e4, discovered check, and I have to go away, so I played king f8, and he takes this bishop on c5. So right now let's have a short count. White has a bishop, a knight, and one pawn for an entire queen. So materially, white is just basically lost. But white has a lot of tricks in this position. So let me, for instance, start with one. So let's suppose I go queen d6, knight d6 check, takes, and here white is already up for choice, but for instance, bishop e5, followed by f takes e check, and yeah, the position is a mess, and it's certainly much easier to play for white. So therefore, what I wanted to do, and this is generally a good thing if you have fewer pieces than your opponent, but the position is imbalanced. Yeah? So in this case, white has two minor pieces against one queen. In these cases, you want to exchange pieces. And that's exactly what I did. So I exchanged the rook, and he played rook takes e1. And well, at first glance, it might still look like white doesn't really have that much. In particular, now I thought, okay, I can go queen d6. If he goes bishop a3, I can just go, I could just go, let's say, king g8, right? And I mean, this discovered attack is never going to materialize. So therefore, I was not really afraid of bishop a3. But instead, he went for something else. So he went for the move knight to d3. And he had planned all of this when he played knight c3. Yeah? So you have to go like 5 moves back, plan this sacrifice, and then judge if you have enough compensation for the queen in such a position. So very creative positional queen sacrifice. Objectively, and I will show this to some degree in the game, this was not enough. I played the move rook e8, went for bishop e5, and I played queen a3. So my idea now is just to pick up the a2 and c2 pawn. And it seems like my opponent can't really make any progress in the meanwhile. So he went for h4. Now I took on a2, and my opponent just went very calmly rook e2. And actually, it's not so easy for me to play this position. So this looks much easier maybe at first glance than it is. So the computer gives some line like queen a5 right now and then queen b5, some wicked maneuvers, but this is not something which you will play as a human. So as a human, I was actually calculating the following line. I thought, well, I can go c5, deflect the knight from d3, and after knight takes c5, I can go rook takes e5, followed by queen a1 check and queen e5 check. But actually he has knight d7 check, very nice, and knight takes e5. And now he materially almost has fully recovered, and my king is still under a lot of danger. So I think objectively this position might still be balanced, but it's definitely much harder for me to play. So therefore, I realized that c5 is not really working that well in this line, and I went for the move king to g8. My opponent now also saw this threat of c5, followed by rook takes e5, and played the strong prophylactic move king to h2. And yeah, in this position, the computer now has a pretty smart suggestion, namely the move c5, with the idea that after knight takes c5, he wants to take on e5. Takes and queen takes c2, when probably the game tilts in my favor. So the evaluation here tilts in my favor. He will go maybe something like knight e6, and it's still not fully clear, but I think the position is, let's say after c6, the position is better for black. So from an objective perspective, this would be maybe one point at which I could punish his play. But from a human perspective, especially now as the time control is approaching, it was really, really hard to deal with that kind of play. I went for a5, which is somewhat weaker and slower. Same idea, but not as strong. He played bishop f3, consolidating the rook on e2. And I went for a4, exchanging one pair of pawns. But now instead of actually taking it, I went for c5. So what's the idea right now? The idea is that after knight c5, I can just win by rook e5, queen c2, and now no matter what he does, I can just take on c5 and I win the game. So therefore, in this position, he can't go knight takes c5, and instead he played another very strong move, namely the move king to g3. I followed up my plan with the move c4, which is probably also not the most precise, but now he really gets some strong counterplay. Knight b4 takes, and knight takes d5. And now it's quite obvious that he's threatening knight f6 check. And during the game, I felt like taking on d5 looks extremely risky. So takes, let's say king f8. And yeah, now I'm not exactly sure like how white continues. Maybe bishop e6. Maybe just bishop f3 back. I don't know. But in any case, these two bishops look pretty risky combined with these pawns. Yeah, so maybe also just after bishop f3 something like g5, and it's really tricky to play. So therefore, I decided to give back in exchange on e5. Takes. And now go for the move queen takes c2, just grabbing more pawns. My opponent went for knight f6 check, king g7. And unfortunately for him here, he went wrong. So the move knight d7 would, according to the computer, lead to a draw. Pretty amazing. I mean, he's threatening f6, so this looks pretty dangerous. But I can defend after f6 check, king g8, another check, and now let's say if I block it, he goes check, king h8, and now let's say just f7, and I'm forced to give a perpetual with the queen, e3, e2, e1, and run after the king. And this amazing game would have ended in a draw. Instead of this, my opponent played the move knight e4. This was still before the time control. And I mean, knight e4 looks a bit nicer than knight e7 in the sense that you also protect your king. And that you have this jump knight g5 later on. But in the concrete position, it is not as strong because my king still has the square on f8. I think this is the main point of why knight e7 is stronger than knight d4 here. I went for queen c1, and now I played rook c5, attacking my pawn on c7 with potential play against my king. Now I gave a few checks to see how the team was doing, and then I decided, okay, I will just take minimal risk, but play on because I felt like I can't really lose the game. I will still have a perpetual later on, and maybe I even have more. So after king f8, rook c7, I again gave a check, and now I went for bishop d5. So right now I'm threatening to exchange the knight, and of course he can't really permit that. And also he could do something like rook c8 check, which I have to calculate. But then I have king e7, f6, and king d7. So this is the line which I calculated, and now the problem is that I'm still threatening to take on e4 and play queen e3 check. If he goes something like f7, I can just take, and then his attack runs out of steam. So therefore, instead of rook c8 check, he went for the sneaky move knight to g5. But now I can take the bishop on f3, and I play the move queen f2, kind of boxing in his king. And after knight g5, I still had to find a pretty precise continuation in order to win the game. Right now it's clear that the only person who's playing for a win is black, because I can give checks on e3 and e2 and just force a perpetual. But I found a way to actually win this, namely by playing the move king to e8. The first idea is that white cannot go rook takes c4 because of queen f1, and then I win the rook. So therefore, my opponent played h5, creating some luft for the king. But I just gave a check, another check, and again repeating moves to see if the team just needs a draw. But Here I felt like playing on still because I don't really risk anything by playing on, and I went for h6. Knight e6. And this combination of knight and rook is quite strong, especially with the knight protecting the rook and being protected by the pawn. The knight can now basically jump back and forth between g7 and e6. And the only way I can run away with the king is to run to the corner of the board, to the square on h8. And that's what I did after some preparatory moves. Check. And now I went for c3. And of course now he has to try to give a perpetual with knight g7, knight e6, but I'm running to g8, rook g7, king h8, and rook f7. And again, there is this amazing perpetual. So if I go c2, he has a perpetual after these moves. Therefore, after rook f7, I can't go c2, and instead I calculated a pretty nice line, which involves both corners of the board. And the line goes queen h1, check, and nice geometry, queen a8. So idea being that after rook f8 check, I can just take and go c2 and get another queen and win the game. And after the move which he played in the game, namely the move f6, trying to go for knight f8 and knight g6, I just went queen b8 check. And now he played move knight f4, which loses on the spot. But even if he plays another move, like for instance king to f3, I can just go c2 now. And after knight f8, I have this queen b3 check, and I can take the rook on b3. So instead he went for knight f4. This now has a similar conclusion. c2. Note that the knight is pinned and that knight g6 followed by rook g7 is not a mate. So he went for the move king to f3. But now I just win in the same fashion, queen b3 check, and I will win the rook on f7. So for me, this was a really fascinating game, and I hope you also enjoyed it. Really kudos to my opponent for coming up with this breathtaking queen sacrifice. I mean, in objective terms, it was likely not the strongest move, but it was really, really hard to play against it over the board. And I think by just looking at it with a computer, you don't realize like how much pressure it is to play against these kind of moves. So thanks a lot for watching, and see you next time.
When you have stress, play chess. When you fall on your ass, play chess for a real deal, for Christian seal.